Hello everybody, how are you doing? Today we're going to talk about this book, Demons by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about this book in some of his earlier lectures when he mentions, when he's on the topic of Marxism and ideology. And he said what he recommends is for people to really understand the horrors that went on in the Gulag camps and that sort of thing. He says, read this book and then read the Gulag Archipelago. And you can sort of trace the linear thought. And so Demons is a book about how ideas like the idea that led to the Gulag started, and that's really what it's about to some extent, is the start of a revolution in a town, and it really deals with the characters and the personalities. And then the Gulag Archipelago is like what did happen as a result of these ideas gaining traction. Now, as far as normal people's knowledge of literature goes, I would say this is one of Dostoevsky's less well-known works. He's more famous for Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov and The Idiot, which is surprising to me after I read this book, because this is a genius work of literature, and the way that he writes characters and the way that characters interact with each other and play off each other's desires and motivations is just so it's so brilliant. And just thinking about like actually creating a work like this is mind-blowing, because there's so much going on, and it's so unbelievably, I wouldn't say it's realistic, because he embellishes his characters a little bit, but in a way that makes for great literature. And he has just deep understanding of psychology in the way that people's minds work. But it's just a joy to read. He never really goes into the inner thoughts and emotions of the characters, but you get almost a transparent look at what's going on inside of them by the way he uses dialogue and action. So he just tells what the characters do and what they say. He doesn't really tell you what they feel and what they think, but you know what they feel and what they think because of what they say. And it's just he's a genius psychologist. Oh, what I will say about this book, though, is it's kind of divided into three parts. And the first third is really boring. Nothing really happens. It's a lot of narration setting up the background of all these different characters. And Jordan Peterson has talked about this before. He said it takes about 150 pages to get going, but then everything snaps together and it takes off really fast. And that's true from my reading. I listened to this book on Audible, and that helped me get through that first third. And then I was constantly referencing the plot summary on the Wikipedia page so I could cement in my mind everything that I just listened to and all the different characters, because there is a lot to keep track of. And if you aren't able to keep track of it, once that second part comes around and the action really starts to pick up, you're going to be a little bit lost. So I recommend referencing that plot summary on the Wikipedia page while you're making it through that first part, because that'll help you out. Dostoevsky is a genius when it comes to writing characters. There is a pretty complicated plot, but I think I'm mostly going to talk about two of the main characters. I would say the main character in this book, he's an interesting main character because he doesn't really take a very active participation in a lot of the action, but all of the action is centered around him. And that is Nikolai Vsevolodovich Stavrogin. Russian names can be another hard thing to keep track of, but Stavrogin is the son of this wealthy lady, and he has done a lot of traveling before the action takes place in this book, and I forget the name of the village, but he's kind of a rich aristocratic figure, and everybody in the book seems to regard him very highly. He's this guy that everybody looks up to as a leader, but he's constantly actively rejecting that title. Like, no, I'm not going to lead. I'm not going to lead. But he has a very complicated past, and at the point that the action of the novel takes place, he's at this point in life where he's basically nothing matters. He's very nihilistic, and it's interesting because when Dostoevsky introduces the character, he gives a physical description of him, and it's something that doesn't really make sense right when you read it, but it really sticks with you. And he says, he's describing him, and he says the skin on his face is very smooth, almost like a porcelain doll, and he's like a really handsome guy. All of his facial features are like perfectly in proportion and stuff, but he says his face almost resembles a mask. And that's just an image that sticks with you, and you don't really know what to make of it at the beginning. And I'm not sure I still do 100%, but I think it refers to his persona that he puts on. He's sort of put a mask on of indifference to the world and to values, and he's a very, very dark, tormented character. But outwardly, he's very stoic and bored. Really, that character really affected me because it's hard to understand him. But so just a couple of examples. There's this one part talking about his past where he's going to these parties, these house parties, and there's people there having conversations, being intellectual, blah, blah, blah. And there's this older gentleman who really likes the phrase when he's arguing with someone. He'll make a point and then he'll say, "No, sir, I will not be led around by the nose." And Stavrogin is there listening to this, and the guy keeps repeating that as he's having a conversation. And Stavrogin is kind of watching, and the wheels start turning. And it's almost like the little devil on his shoulder is whispering to him. And eventually the guy says it again, "No, sir, I will not be led around by the nose." And Stavrogin walks up to him and grabs his nose and starts dragging him around the room in front of everybody. And it's like this really embarrassing, scandalous situation. And it's like, dude, what the heck? Like, why are you acting like this? And that prompts the man's son to challenge him to a duel later on in the in the book because of this public insult. And so Stavrogin's like, okay, what the heck? I got to go through with this stupid duel. And so the guy, they pace off, and the guy aims at him and shoots at him and misses. And then it's Stavrogin's turn, and he fires in the air. And the guy's like, "Hey, what the heck? You're not taking this seriously." And he's like, "Well, I just don't want to kill anybody because I don't, I don't care about this." And the guy's like, "No, screw that. We're going again." And so he shoots at him and misses, and Stavrogin shoots up in the air again and drops the pistol and walks away. And it's like, he's so hard to understand because there's another part in the book where he gets punched in the face at a party publicly. This guy just walks up and cold cocks him. And he takes the hit and then he grabs the guy out of anger, but then immediately realizes what he's doing and he lets go and just stares at the guy. And the guy lowers his eyes and walks away. And on the one hand, all these actions, except for the pulling the guy by the nose, all these actions are good. Like he chooses not to take violence, but he's choosing to not engage with life and make any kind of value judgments. And it's like, what's going on? And he's a smart guy, and when all this revolutionary stuff starts happening around him, he has many, many opportunities to take a side or to become some sort of leader in the action, and he knows what's right, but he's forcing himself to disbelieve in good or evil. I got a quote about him. I'll find it later. But yeah, he's very, very conflicted, very tormented character. And I was thinking about this. It's like, what's going on? And it's almost like, sometimes I will get in an argument like with my wife. And the right thing to do is to try not to win the argument, but try to reconcile and fight with each other towards the greater good. Like, let's solve this problem. Let's argue, but in a way that's oriented toward something good that we can both agree upon so that we can come together. But sometimes when you do that, there's this tendency to want to win and put the other person down. And every once in a while, I'll have this thing where I am watching myself act out the role of a nasty arguer who will say things that are really biting to try and win and make her lose at the same time, and it gets really dark, and it's not good. But it's like sometimes it'll happen when I don't even care about the issue anymore. Like, I don't even care that I got yelled at for leaving my shoes in the wrong spot or something silly like that. It's like the issue no longer matters, and I'm not even mad anymore. But I'm watching myself act out this role of a bad person, basically, and that's sort of what Stavrogin is like throughout this whole novel. He's watching himself not have any moral code. And it's like, what the heck is going on with this character? It's very dark. But everything sort of starts to make sense when you get to the censored chapter. Now, when this book was first published, there was a chapter that Dostoevsky tried really, really hard to get in there. It's called At Tikhon's, and Stavrogin goes to a priest named Tikhon and goes to confession. And that's the chapter, is this conversation between him and this priest. And he confesses these things that happened in his past, things that he did. And it's like, oh, that's why you're trying, not trying to destroy everything in your life, but sabotaging your life and other people's lives through sins of omission, basically, I would say. So when you read this book, make sure it has that chapter in it. A lot of times it'll be at the end as sort of an appendix. I read one that was translated, actually the title was The Devils. It'll be translated differently sometimes. And that chapter was inserted in the middle of the book, so that it flowed with the story. And yeah, really, Dostoevsky's such a psychologist, you know. He's like, he has this scene in the book that's basically a counseling session with this priest, and it's powerful. So there's this character named Shatov who, in the past, before the action of this book takes place, Stavrogin had a really close friendship with Shatov. And there's a lot of philosophical discussions in this book about like the problems that society has and you know, culture. And Shatov in the book is someone whose passion, I guess you could call him a conservative in some sense. He's passionate about, we need the solution to this meaning crisis, to borrow from John Vervaeke, that our culture is having, is we need to return to orthodoxy. We need to return to Christ. And he's one of the only characters who is a passionate Christian. And the reason why he has this philosophy is because in the past, Stavrogin made a heroic speech to him about why we need to return to Christ. And he was convinced and sort of converted. And so Stavrogin was an evangelist to him and converted him. And then there's this other character named Kirillov, who's really dark character. He is convinced and he's obsessed with the idea of committing suicide as an act of rebellion against God, basically. It's hard to explain. Dostoevsky does a really good job of developing that character. But he's basically like, yeah, you're all being lied to. There is no God, or if there is a God, this whole life existence is a joke. And the heroic thing to do is kill yourself. And it's, you know, people say that nowadays, like, you should, you know, why don't you just kill yourself? And it's kind of always like, yeah, whatever, man. Like, you don't actually believe that. That's just being dark for the sake of being dark. But this character is like really actually thought it through, and he comes to this conclusion that that's the proper way to behave, and it's unbelievably, it's just kind of convincing in a way. Like, Dostoevsky just does such a good job of arguing these opposing viewpoints through his characters. That's why he's such an amazing novelist, because, well, I think Jordan Peterson said in one of his lectures, he said, okay, you've got all these different ideologies. The normal thing to do would be to take a side, and then the opposing side, you straw man it, so that your side can argue stronger against it. But that's not what Dostoevsky does. He takes all these opposing worldviews and makes them as strong as he can, and then sees what happens. And anyway, so Kirillov has this really nihilistic, suicidal philosophy because in the past, Stavrogin convinced him that there is no God and there is no point to life except, like, through his suicide, he can transcend the arbitrary limitations of this life and beat God at this weird competition that's set up between the will of God and the will of man, and the way to beat God is to kill yourself, to prove something. So Stavrogin he's such a charismatic character. All of these other characters are looking to him. And you've got Shatov, who Stavrogin convinced to become a Christian. And you've got Kirillov, who Stavrogin convinced to become this suicidal nihilistic atheist. And now Stavrogin now is basically like, I'm just gonna watch what happens and don't tell me to lead you in any other way. But everyone's like, no, you could be the leader and you could be the one to lead us out of this moral malaise that we have. And gosh, so there's this other character. So I talked a lot about Stavrogin. There's this other character named Pyotr Stepanovich Verkovensky. It's like a Russian name for Peter, so I'm going to call him Peter. So he is like the main instigator of all the mayhem that takes place in this book. So once the action starts rolling, like some horrific crimes start to be committed, and it's like the title of this book is really interesting that it's called Demons, but there's no like outwardly demonic stuff that happens. But once you read it and think back on it, it's like, yeah, there was some, like a box of from like hell opened up and all the demons came out of the pit to play in this town, just because of the stuff that happens. And so Peter he arrives in town and he starts aggressively trying to influence everybody and weasel his way into people's lives. And he's unbelievably hyperactive, talks really, really fast, never sleeps, it seems like, and he's like this crazy busybody guy that's meddling in everything. And he's kind of he's not what you would think as an antagonist. He's almost a buffoon type of character. He's like silly and like kind of got this high-pitched voice, but talks really, really fast and flatters people, and like it's almost like he's not self-aware. Like he has no dignity, really. He's not really self-conscious. He's wholly devoted to this cause. And so what's this cause? Outwardly it's socialism, and he makes he has his printing press and he makes all of this socialist propaganda and stuff. But there's this really powerful scene, and I think Jordan Peterson has talked about it a lot. And it's when you read about this book, what other people have said about this book, they keep going back to this scene, and it's this meeting that Peter holds, and a whole bunch of characters are present. Some of the main characters, I think Stavrogin is there, and both Shatov and Kirillov are there. But then also all of these other ivory tower intellectual types. And they're talking about their cause. And they're all like PhD people, really smart. And so that's telling that Dostoevsky has all of the intellectuals, and they're in this meeting talking about, okay, what's our end goal here? And it's clear that it's not socialism in the sense that, let's level the equality of outcome, I guess you could say, for people financially or whatever. It's revolution for the sake of revolution, using the ideology of socialism as an excuse. But basically, there's this character named Shigalyev, and he's this older gentleman who's like an intellectual. He's brought to this meeting in the pretense of being a really powerful thinker. And he said, what's going to have to happen for this way of life to be sustainable is for 10% of the population to receive power and 90% to become slaves. And for that to take place, it's going to cost 10 million lives. And Solzhenitsyn, the author of Gulag Archipelago, pointed to that scene and said that was prophetic, because this was written before the Soviet Union, which killed 10 million people. And he's like, yep, that Dostoevsky saw what was coming when he wrote this book. And it's a creepy scene, especially because it's like all of these ivory tower intellectual types are meeting together, talking about how we're going to control all of the peasants out there, all of the working class people. Like, they're going to become the 90%. What we're doing is just to put us at the top so that we can live in the capital, like the Hunger Games, and it's ugh. So Verkovensky, so Peter, he has his relationships with all of the other characters are, how can I use these people for the cause? And so with Shatov, the Christian, he looks at him and he's like, that's an enemy, and I could create cohesion and devotion to the cause if I can rope everybody in my group into offing Shatov. And so he uses him as like that. And then Kirillov, he sees an opportunity and he's like, oh, you are committed to killing yourself? Okay, well, since it doesn't matter anyway, and nothing in this life is meaningful, how about you kill yourself at a time that's opportune to me? I'll let you know when to do it, and then you do it, and I'll use that opportunity to further my cause. And the scene between Peter and Kirillov, that's like the closest thing in the book that has a kind of supernatural element to it. And the room where they're talking about Kirillov killing himself is just charged with, like, you can just sense that there are evil spirits in that room. And it's a heck of a scene. And then with Stavrogin, Peter sees that he's got this potential to be a charismatic leader, and he is, even though he's trying not to be. And so Peter constantly is like, when we seize power, you are going to be the face of the revolution. You're going to be, the big brother, and you can lead us. And Stavrogin's like, no, I'm not about that. I'm about doing nothing and letting the chaos happen, but because it doesn't matter. But I'm not going to take an active role. And there's a really, what's the word? Really weird scene that sort of, it's like the most personality you see in Peter, and it's the scene where he's chasing after Stavrogin, almost crawling and like groveling at his feet, saying like, we need you," and he's oscillating between like making these speeches about the cause, like, "We need to stir up trouble," blah blah blah, and he's spouting all of this propaganda, and he's oscillating between that and like being this groveling little puppy, and it whips him up into, he's not even self-conscious about what he's doing, and Stavrogin is like looking down on him like, what the heck is going on? And he's whipping himself up into this like declaration of love, and he says, "Stavrogin, you're beautiful," and tries to kiss his hand. And it's so just a weird scene. Like, he's such a crazy character, but totally believable at the same time. And Dostoevsky even said, when he was talking about this novel, he said, surprisingly, this character who's representative of he's the instigator of this revolution. He's like, to my surprise, he's almost a comic character. And Dostoevsky didn't know that was going to happen when he wrote this character. It's brilliant. So the scene that sort of kicks everything off is Peter gets the most control over the governor's wife. And so he really is able to manipulate her through flattery and charisma and stuff. And she wants to put on this event that's like a literary reading. So there's this poet in town who's going to retire, and they're going to open up this auditorium and have him read his poetry. And so Peter, he manipulates that event in a really really Machiavellian kind of way, and so he promotes it so that it's going to be this really big event. And then when it happens, he is like an usher, and he lets in all of these disreputable characters. And so there's all of these aristocratic figures there in the audience to go and see this literary reading. But then Peter also lets in all of these hoodlums and hooligans, and they're like people from the wrong side of town, I guess. And the place is packed, and it's like, what are all these characters doing here? This is like a poetry reading. And he gives them free alcohol and stuff, and so he's charging this event and setting it up for the most potential to unleash chaos. And it's such a brilliant, funny scene. It reminded me so much of the things that have been happening on college campuses, like when Ben Shapiro goes to Madison University to give this speech, and then all hell breaks loose because this giant group of students, storm the stage and start shouting all of these chants, like anti-white supremacy and blah 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 blah, and that sort of happens in this scene, and just like all chaos breaks loose. Different people take the stage and steal the microphone. They didn't have microphones, but start shouting whatever their cause is, and a lot of people in the auditorium are just like amused at and anarchy. It's anarchy, and it's exciting, and anyway. The event is a total failure, and it's from that sort of birth of anarchy and chaos, all of this really bad stuff starts to happen. Like, people start to get murdered later in the night, and it's it's horrifying because it's like so believable that this could actually happen, and especially watching these YouTube videos of these riots on college campuses on Berkeley. It's like that's how this thing starts, and what happens next. And Dostoevsky, through the story, he like takes it to the next step and takes it to the next step, and people start getting killed. Scary, scary book. He got Dostoevsky got criticized a lot when this book came out from a lot of the left-leaning his colleagues and critics, and they criticized him a lot for exaggerating. Like, yeah, that wouldn't really happen. Like you definitely exaggerated. And it is exaggerated because it's fiction, and especially with Dostoevsky, his characters are so long-winded, and they wear their heart on their sleeves, and they're just these Im- stormy, emotional Russians. It's like people don't really talk like that in real life, even though they do have those emotions in real life. He just gives them words, and I just love him as an author because of that. But all of the events and all of the characters are actually based on real life events and real life people. There's a guy during Dostoevsky's time named Sergei Nechayev, and he based Peter Verkovensky on Sergei Nechayev, and he was a revolutionary who committed a political murder, and he wrote a manifesto called the Catechism of the Revolutionary, which is a very famous manifesto for for revolutionaries. Like, I think actually Che Guevara studied that manifesto written by Nechayev. I might have that wrong, but if it wasn't Che, it was some other famous revolutionary. And so Dostoevsky studied those events, the people surrounding them, and he based every one of his characters in this book off of real life people. And it's a if I knew more about history, I think I would understand to the extent at how prophetic this book actually is. But everything I've read, I haven't read that much. I've read the Wikipedia page on demons, but it has all of these citations of things that actually happened after this book was written that tie back to this novel. And Richard Pevier, one of the more modern translators of Dostoevsky, actually argues that there's a scene that he prophesied Vladimir Lenin and described. There's this one character who gets up at the literary reading and takes over the stage and starts pounding the podium, and he describes him physically, and he basically describes Vladimir Lenin like pounding the podium, spouting this revolutionary propaganda. And it's man, it's a heck of a book. One thing that I've noticed about the Dostoevsky books that I read is he in a lot of his books, I think almost all the books that I've read, except maybe Notes from the Underground, he has a biblical passage in that book that comes at a time that speaks to one of the characters or to the situation really, really profoundly. And I really love that. But in this book, that is, what is that? That's Mark 5 at the beginning, where Jesus goes across the sea to the Samaritan village, and he meets the man who's possessed by a legion of demons. And the demons speak to Jesus, and he says, "What is your name?" And they say, "My name is Legion, for we are many." and he casts out the demons into a herd of pigs nearby, and the pigs rush down the slope into the sea and are drowned. And at the beginning of this book, that passage of scripture is sort of a, what's it called, an epigraph at the beginning. And then later on, one of the characters reads that that passage and talks about what it means, how it relates to Russia right now, and how all of these demonic forces, which manifest now as atheistic beliefs, came out of Europe and entered into Russia. And Russia, as a result, rushed down the cliff and drowned. And I just, whoa, that like really blew my mind when I thought about it. And it's so, my understanding of demons, like I actually believe that there are angels and demons and spiritual forces, but I've never thought about them as ideologies before. And I think there's something to be said about that, because the result of these demonic ideologies it results in millions of deaths, and it's scary. And Dostoevsky, he does in this book, he doesn't blame the ideology. What he blames is the rejection of God. And he says, if we lose God, if we become atheists, this is what could happen. And so his sympathies lie with the character of Shatov. And man, that's really worth thinking about. So I hope I didn't spoil too much. I really recommend this book, Demons by Dostoevsky. Tell me what you thought of the book or my thoughts on it in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.